Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us again for the Capstone project, where we interview senior researchers and connect the dots between individual research projects that they've done in their life to see the holistic picture of their career and its impact on Arizona agriculture. I'm here interviewing Rick Wood from the Wood Company consulting firm. He's been in farming for his whole life, and so has his father and his grandfather before him. He started his work in the greenhouse industry, where he worked on hydroponics, assessing the nutrient needs of plants. He then moved on to Wilbur Ellis and Blythe and Marana, and then he worked for Action Produce in 1979, where he continued to work his whole life as an entomologist and head grower, all throughout the 80s and 90s. He retired, but then came back to be a consultant for Sundance Farms. Rick, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
A lot of people don't want to go to drip irrigation because they fear salt buildup. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree, and that's why when I was with Mr. Wirtz at Sundance, we developed the equipment to move that salt from the growing area, the top of the beds, and put it back in the bottoms. With drip irrigation, especially if you're using acid, you will park 90% of your sodium in the top quarter of an inch. Well, by the time that happens, where your roots should be down at 6 inches. So you're lifting all your salts up, but getting it out of the root zone.
I've seen that where seedlings are classic sodium stressed. They've got the burnt leaf fringes, but then they grow through it.
Right, because they're getting out of it.
Because they're getting out of it.
Because drip irrigation, if you took a side or a cross section of the bed, the wetting pattern with drip irrigation looks like a wetted onion. Okay, if your drip tape is here, it will go out laterally and then down. Over irrigation with drip, gravity takes over and the water just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. That's why short, frequent irrigations keeps the salt in the top of the bed until you get rain, but it keeps the salt in the top, and the roots are always in optimum moisture.
Interesting. What about emitter size? I've heard you want to use something that is a very slow release, so there's more capillary action rather than having it go out really quickly, where you do have that dripping effect down further.
Well, I think a lot of it is opinionated. Personally, I like a medium flow emitter. I don't like to have a long time to apply, because you reach saturation around the tape, and then you have to leave it on in order to apply. With a larger emitter, say a 0.24 gallon per hour, then you can apply your ½ an inch in 10 hours. If you're down at say a 0.16, you're looking at almost a third, to double the amount of time to apply the necessary water. And then you reach, water moves by capillary action, but as you reach saturation, gravity takes over and it wants to go down.
So, you'll have a zone right around the tape that'll be totally saturated, and the nutrients will.
Everything goes straight down rather than moving laterally.
And it must be a matter of knowing your soils too.
Yes. You always match the emitter spacing and emitter size to your soil type. It's the infiltration rates. And that goes back to something that came around, and it's been probably 15, 20 years ago. Netafim came out and said, we really don't need to have the pressure. You can let gravity be your friend, so you're not spending the money on the pumps. All right. Well, if you look at the pressure, the flow versus pressure bell curve, okay, on a standard, say a 0.24 gallon per hour emitter, it puts out its optimum at 12 to 15 psi. You take that same emitter and you run it at 6 psi, it will only put out 0.12. So that's this low, this low pressure systems, they work, but it's the time to apply.
And meanwhile, you're paying an irrigator to be there longer. You're getting a not great.
I just don't think that you get the uniformity.
You don't get the uniformity.
And you can't get the water to move laterally with, a point, with this low flow, the water doesn't want to move laterally, it wants to go down with gravity.
Makes sense. And then conversely, when your emitter size is too large, you have the same effect.
Well, a larger emitter, you would think about a larger emitter if you were looking at a crop like melons. Where watermelons you plant one plant every 36 inches, you don't need an emitter every 6 inches.
Right.
If you plant cotton, you're looking at one plant every 6 inches. Same thing with, say, corn. You're planting one seed every 6 inches. You really don't need one emitter every 6 inches. You can go to a 12-inch spacing because the water only has to travel 6 inches to meet itself.
Yeah.
I think that, iceberg lettuce, romaine, I think that, the drip is going to give us a better crop uniformity and less input cost after the cost of the drip because of the, utilizing less input, fertilizer, i.e. On alfalfa, I don't think that you're going to significantly reduce the quantity of water, but alfalfa is extremely expensive to plant. With these new genetics, you're looking at probably $9 a pound for seed, and you want to be in that 20-25 pounds of coated seed per acre. So you want the stand to last longer. With the drip irrigation, you don't have scalding and ponding and all of that. And it will lend itself more to unlevel ground.
What about weed controls?
Weed control, I think in the orchards and in crops like that, if you don't have water on top of the soil, you're not going to germinate the weeds. But you still are going to germinate them in the seed line. So herbicide-wise, you can probably ban your herbicides as long as you keep the bottoms dry.
One question I have, speaking of banding, should you adjust your fertilizer to be more of a banded per acre, or should you calculate your fertilizer as a standard acreage?
I think you calculate it as a standard acre, but you're using less of it. If we were to go out today and side dress AN20 on an iceberg crop in the field, we're looking at probably 40 gallons per acre. But it's a one-time thing because you don't want to take your tractors back. With the drip, we can run little 3 to 5 gallon shots once or twice a week. And the plants are just a lot more happy. With tree crops, I'm understanding that pecans love subsurface irrigation, but you have to start it on subsurface irrigation. To go back and try and retrofit that, trees just don't like it.
The root structure's built.
The root structures are built for the flood because they're all going to be out there at the drip line. Whereas with drip irrigation, they'll stay in tight. They'll go to the water and then quit. So we've talked about row crops. You can grow great durum, wheat, barley, the grass crops. Look, they're great on drip. The only thing that you have to do is plant your seed a little bit deeper in between the tape. Because the water is going to move laterally, but not on the flat. So you plant the seed a little deeper, you can get a great stand of grain, and you'll use less fertilizer. I think that the university recommendations for durum, in order to make adequate protein, I think an adequate protein is 14, for durum. On the drip, I didn't apply, their 200 pounds of N. I think we were getting by with 100, 150 units of N and making the same quality.
Were you just taking petiole samples? How were you assessing your crop?
I think a lot of us old guys, we can look at a crop and tell you what it's doing. The latest thing is sap analysis. I really like the sap analysis. Early on, we did a lot with the cardimeters, so that we could assess nitrogen levels in the field. But most of the time, unless you can do it really rapidly, most of the time now, it's all visual.
What about tape placement under the plant? Do you want to go, you mentioned it with the wheat, what about produce? Do you want to put that tape right under the taproot of a
No, you want to
lettuce?
put it in the middle, because the water will move laterally. Tape placement, and here again, I've heard stories about, in say the Midwest, where they were supplementing their center pivots with drip, but they goes back to the specialty equipment that Mr. Wirtz designed. You can't go out there and place your tape 4 inches deep and then run a ripper, or you'll tear your tape out. So I've heard stories about tape being placed at say 12 inches deep on the flat. Well, you have to supplement until the roots get into that deal. All of the vegetables that we grew on the permanent drip tape in say the Coolidge area, I always put the tape at the bottom of the furrow with a shaped bed. So if you had a 4-inch bed, your tape would be at about 5 inches from the top of that
From the
bed.
top of the bed.
But when you flattened it out, then you're only at 2 to 3 inches. If you took all that dirt and put it back in the furrow, then you're only about 2 inches. Now I did some work in northern Arizona where they had designed the drip irrigation for alfalfa, and they put it 8 inches deep. But then when we made the beds to plant produce on it, we brought up another 4, so all of a sudden your tape is at 12 inches below the crop. And with sodium, that goes back to sodium management, we use sprinklers to try and drive the sodium down. Well, you can't drive it down 12 inches. So as soon as we turned the drip back on and got rid of the sprinklers, it pushed the sodium right back to the top. You can't get away from it. So there's a lot of management tools, and that was what I kind of thought we were going to talk about, and things that we've seen that we could pass on to the younger generations.
Yeah.
But I guess that's why we're consultants.
Well, you do have a lot of good knowledge there. And that's very interesting. So you're pushing the salt down with the sprinklers, and then it's hitting that wetting front that's pushing it back.
And push it right back up again when you turn the tape on.
Wow.
But with the shallow tape, you can push the sodium past your tape.
Yeah. But, or will it rise to the top, concentrate on the top, and then you...
No. If you pre-irrigate, it'll push it up. And that was one of the issues that we had in watermelons with say, when you're transplanting watermelons, the type of planters that we use leaves a groove in the top of the bed. Okay? Well, most of your beds are going to be rolled to the center. And so you can push that salt away, but as soon as you get a monsoon rain, it pushes all the salt right back in. So we actually developed a rolling bed shaper that made the top of the bed round so that the salt would push, and if we got monsoons, it would make it go to the furrow.
Interesting. There's a lot to this. So is that all just trial and error?
Well, it's just observations. I think that, it's easy to explain it, but it's a whole lot easier to show it. And there's nothing that can take the place of the eye and the hand. It's, agriculture to me has always been touchy-feely. Some of the things that are going on right now is everybody's going back to these electronically, they measure soil moisture electronically. Well, you go out there and you put this tube, with the sensors in it, but you really don't reconsolidate the soil around that tube. Same thing with a tensiometer. If a tensiometer can stay in place year after year after year, it gives you accurate measurements of soil moisture. The same thing with these electronic units. But if you go out there and you dig a hole 3 inches in diameter, and you put a 1-inch rod down in that hole and kick the dirt back in it, it's not telling you what's really happening, because that dirt is not reconsolidated. But if you go out there with your soil probe, you know what's happening at 12, 24, and 8 and 36 inches, because you can feel it.
Yeah. And you know, one thing with tensiometers is sometimes the clay, if you have a heavy clay, it might expand or contract with water, and then you don't have that surface contact with the soil, which is the challenge. And I know when installing a tensiometer, they typically say, well, you want to dig a little wider, and then you want to make a slurry of your soil and some water in a bucket and pour it around the neck of that tensiometer to have it go all the way down to try to eliminate that.
But that's the issue, because most people don't take that time.
Yeah, so proper installation.
Proper installation
of your
goes
soil
back to
probes.
everything.
Yeah. And where would you put, if you're doing watermelons or something, okay, so lettuce, you have a 2-line bed. You're obviously putting the tape in the middle so that your tap roots don't go down into it. What about watermelon?
Probably 2 inches to the side, or it's a 2x4. You're 2 inches to the side and 4 inches deep.
And that's so if it shoots down a tap root, it won't be...
But watermelons are mostly a fibrous root system.
So if it shoots down, well then why do the offset?
So that you don't congregate salt. The best watermelons I ever grew, you know, on a temporary system, I put 3 lines in the bed. And this is back in the old whitefly days, you know, when we had the whitefly so bad. And Dr. Palumbo, you know, hit upon it. You know, when you first plant, you put down your admire, okay, imidacloprid, I think is what it's called.
Neos.
Okay, as your plants vine, your roots are vining. So if you put more admire in the middle, it's not in the feeder roots. So if you put another 2 lines of drip in that bed, especially with these new 5mm disposable tape, then you can put your admire, imidacloprid, whatever you want, out there where it's actually can get picked up and used.
Faster uptake, better uptake, quicker protection against the whitefly and all the viruses that they carry. That's a good tip.
And at some point in time, especially with a portable system, you know, using the lay flat, a portable system, you can go out there and disconnect the one in the middle and feed it out here where it's actually, you know, can utilize what you're giving it.
So you have total control with drip.
Yes.
What are some challenges that you've seen, maybe plugging or in-season calcium deposits, or how do you treat a plugged emitter if you're in season, halfway through the season?
You can actually hot acid. You can run the acid, you know, down to say a pH of 3, and it's not going to hurt the crop because you're not going to change the soil. You know, you're not, you know, you can't put enough acid out there to change the pH of the dirt. You know, it's like, you know, trying to dilute the salt in the ocean. It's there.
Right.
But hot acid, that will, you know, clean out a lot of the calcification. If you've got the system designed correctly, you can flush. And flushing is critical.
When you say flush, what does that mean?
It means, you know, while the system is running, you go to the bottom end of the field and you open up your valve so that the water is flowing through the tape, you know, and then out.
And do you catch that, or is that just
let it go?
Let it go.
Now, there are some people that have done that. I've seen it before where they actually flushed into, say, a 1,000-gallon trailer and used that water to water roads. You know, it can be used, you know, but you have to tool for it.
I'm learning so much about drip and its applications, and really the only thing keeping people back behind this great technology, because we all know it works, right?
It's cost.
It's cost.
Dollars and cents.
It's cost. And so where does How does the farmer get more money if they
One of
use
the
this technology?
something that popped into my head. You were asking about the pitfalls. Gophers. Gophers are horrible. If there's gophers in the area, they will go right to the tape trying to find water, and they'll bite your tape. It causes a leak. Then you have to physically go fix it.
What do you do about gophers? How do you?
Well, if you're licensed correctly, and you stay on it, phos toxin, will eliminate a lot of the gopher issues. A lot of the people have purchased the injector where they go around the edges of the field with the bait, and that way you don't get an inward migration. But gophers, gophers are your biggest issue. You can combat plugging, you can combat silting. That's mechanical. But when you start talking about the gophers, you physically have to eliminate them. Now, I understand that where they're running a lot of telone, the telone will drive them out of the field. But that's not going to get rid of them. You have to be, you have to trap them, kill them, you have to physically eliminate them.
What about, so in Yuma, we have a canal system. Is that conducive to running drip irrigation?
Certainly. As long as you filter it correctly. I've actually built systems in eastern Arizona where the water coming down the canals looked like chocolate milk. When it goes through the filters, it's totally potable. So filtration is your key there. The water here in coming off the canals in Yuma, sand media is good. I think you could still get away with it with the screen filters. You might want, instead of 120 micron screen, you might want 180. And they'll let them flush themselves.
But isn't the delivery system different? Aren't they designed to shoot out a whole field in a very high head and kind of fast delivery of water to your field rather than holding it in the canal? I
think you have to pump it out. I don't think you can gravity feed it out. You can use the canal as your reservoir. In a lot of areas, I put some drip in down in the central Mexico, and we built a 27 million gallon pond. And we just pull it out of the pond. A lot of the work that we did in eastern Arizona, we built ponds because you have interconnected wells that you used to use. Well, you can run them down the ditch, put them in your pond, pump it out, and go. And the pump that you put in the pond is already rated to give you the 50 psi before the tanks, for flushing and everything. But you just use your, put a flow meter. If you're going to pull out of the canal, you have to be able to measure the water. So just put a flow meter after the filter before it goes into your system. And the size of your booster pump, for want of a better word, can surface multiple blocks, and that can be done automatically. You can put an automatic valves on them and change them with your smartphone anymore.
Do you think that would, maybe for one farm, the canal would work because you could just hold it in the canal. But when you're talking about interconnected farms and sharing service with others.
Well, I think that, say, for the Yuma Valley, everybody has their own turnout that goes into on-farm ditches. Think about using that concrete ditch as a reservoir. So you go to your water company and say, well, instead of asking for a 20 CFS head, you get 1 CFS.
Just fill it up, hold it.
Just fill it up, and you can always go to the head gate. If you've got a pump with a variable speed on it, whether it's diesel powered, where you can idle it down, or an electric with a vari-drive on it. Once it hits that, then you can you adjust your head gate to hold that water level, and what's coming in is going out. That's time and motion.
That makes sense. That was a big fear that I've heard from people. They say, well, the mesa, Yuma Mesa, is just not set up for something like that.
Make it work. If you want it to work, you can make it work.
Make it work.
Drip will make a good farmer better. But drip will not make a bad farmer a good farmer.
What about training irrigators? Because this is a whole new world.
It's much easier. When you're flood irrigating and they're having to go out there and set hoses, they have to physically, there's a lot of physical work. With the drip, it's a matter of teaching them to look at the pressure on the top end, look at the pressure on the bottom end, and be able to look at their watch and say, okay, it's been 5 hours, I open this one up and I go close this one with a turn of a knob.
So a lot easier than putting down siphon tubes and running the border and...
Yeah.
Okay.
And look at, in some of our fields, I know that a lot of the Yuma Valley was set up years ago to grow cotton, where you run the rows east-west, and that's the way it was designed. But with twin-line crops like broccoli, romaine, iceberg lettuce, where you've got 2 lines on a bed, it's imperative during the winter that you run everything north-south.
Yes.
Now, cauliflower is a single-line crop. You can run it east-west, doesn't make any difference. But it's that sunlight intensity, that's why we run everything north and south. So we have to waste soil to give us more, to be able to turn it the other way. These are real long runs north and south, but they're short runs east-west. Because that was the way they were designed originally.
Interesting. Well, I think I'm all out of drip irrigation questions.
Well, I hope that we've answered some of them.
So to summarize, drip's been around for a while. When it first came out, it took some real innovators to get it going. And it's been a kind of a bumpy road, but we figured out how to do it right. And the only thing holding people back right now is the initial cost, which maybe they can recoup through reduced inputs, reduced labor on the back end. But it gives you better control over your crop, whatever your crop may be. You can do it with vegetables, with row crops, summer rotationals. Whatever it may be, it gives you more control, more accuracy, and produces a better product, would you say?
I think that the quality of the product is based on the grower, but it will give you a more consistent crop because the plants are happier.
Thank you, Rick.